Once upon a time, in a bustling town filled with the sounds of life and laughter, there lived a loving and beautiful couple named Peter and Mabel. They were deeply in love, and their bond was so strong that people in the town often remarked that they were inseparable. Their love story was the envy of all, a tale of passion, dedication, and mutual respect. Peter was a strong, hard-working man who earned his living as a skilled carpenter, while Mabel was a gentle and nurturing woman who brought warmth and light to their home. As the years passed, their love for each other only grew stronger. The couple eagerly anticipated the day they would welcome a child into their lives. When Mabel became pregnant, their joy was boundless. Peter was over the moon, and every night he would talk to Mabel's growing belly, dreaming about the life they would have with their child. "Whether it's a boy or a girl, our child will be our greatest blessing," Peter would say with a broad smile. Mabel would laugh and hold his hand, her heart filled with love and hope. The day finally arrived when Mabel gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Divine, believing she was a true gift from the heavens. Peter was ecstatic as he held his daughter for the first time, marveling at her tiny features and the miracle of her life. Mabel watched with tears of joy as Peter whispered sweet promises of love and protection to their newborn daughter. However, as the days turned into weeks, the couple began to notice something unusual about Divine. She was an exceptionally quiet baby. Too quiet. Unlike other babies, she didn't cry or coo. She made no sounds at all. At first, they thought she was simply a calm and contented child, but as time passed, the truth became clear. Divine was mute. Peter's initial joy gave way to frustration and confusion. He couldn't understand why his child, who seemed so perfect, couldn't speak. As the reality of Divine's condition sank in, Peter's frustration grew into anger, and he began to search for someone to blame. Unfortunately, he directed his anger at Mabel. "This is your fault!" Peter would shout, his voice filled with bitterness. "You must have eaten something bad while you were pregnant, something that cursed our child." Mabel's heart broke each time he blamed her, but she remained silent, hoping that Peter's anger would pass and that he would eventually accept their daughter for who she was. But Peter's bitterness only deepened over time. He could not reconcile the idea of his daughter being different, and in his eyes, Mabel was the cause of this misfortune. The once warm and loving home they had built together became a place of tension and sorrow. Divine, unaware of the turmoil around her, grew into a sweet and gentle child, her silence a constant reminder of Peter's disappointment and rage. When Divine turned 5, Peter and Mabel tried desperately to have another child, hoping that a second baby might bring some joy back into their lives. But despite their efforts, Mabel was unable to conceive again. This failure only fueled Peter's resentment further. He began to withdraw from Mabel, his love for her now twisted into something dark and bitter. One fateful evening, after another heated argument, Peter made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. He stood before Mabel, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You and the child have brought nothing but misery into my life. Leave and don't ever come back." Mabel was stunned, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. She had nowhere to go, no family or friends to turn to, but Peter's words left no room for argument. With tears streaming down her face, she packed a few belongings and took Divine by the hand. As they stepped out of the home they had once filled with love and laughter, Mabel's heart ached for the life they had lost, and for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Mabel and Divine wandered the streets of the town, unsure of where to go. The night was cold and the streets were nearly empty. Mabel's thoughts raced as she tried to figure out how they would survive. She had no money, no family nearby, and now no home. Her only concern was for Divine, who clung to her hand, her innocent eyes looking up at her mother with trust and love. After hours of walking, Mabel came across an uncompleted building on the outskirts of town. It was a shell of a house with no doors or windows, but it offered some shelter from the cold. Desperate and exhausted, Mabel decided they would stay there for the night. She found a corner where they could huddle together, using the few belongings they had to keep warm. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as Mabel and Divine made the uncompleted building their home. Mabel did her best to provide for Divine, taking on odd jobs whenever she could find them, but work was scarce and money even scarcer. They lived on the bare minimum, often going hungry, for days at a time. Despite the hardship, Mabel remained determined to keep her daughter safe and cared for. She never let Divine see her despair, always finding a way to smile and reassure her that everything would be okay. Divine, for her part, adapted to their new life with surprising resilience. Though she couldn't speak, she communicated with Mabel through gestures and expressions, and her bright smile never faded. Mabel found strength in Divine's unwavering positivity, even as they faced daily challenges that would break most people. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger with each passing day, forged in the fires of their shared struggle. 15 long years passed in this way. Divine grew into a young woman, beautiful and kind, with an inner strength that belied her quiet nature. She had learned to navigate the world without words, her actions and gestures speaking volumes to those who took the time to understand her. Despite the harshness of their life, Divine's spirit remained unbroken, and she was a source of comfort and joy to Mabel. But as time went on, the town around them began to change. The uncompleted building, once forgotten and abandoned, became the focus of new construction plans. One day, the owner of the building arrived with a team of workers, ready to resume the work that had been left unfinished so many years ago. When he found Mabel and Divine living there, he was furious. "This is private property!" the man shouted. "You have no right to be here! Get out or I'll have the authorities remove you!" Mabel pleaded with him, explaining their situation and begging for more time. But the man was unmoved. He gave them until the end of the day to leave, and Mabel knew she had no choice but to comply. With a heavy heart, she gathered their little belongings once more, and together, she and Divine left the only shelter they had known for the past 15 years. As they walked away from the building that had been their home, Mabel's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She thought of an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in years, but who might still be in the nearby city. With no other options, Mabel decided they would travel there and hope that her friend would take them in. The journey was long and difficult, but Mabel and Divine pressed on, driven by the hope that they might find refuge with Mabel's friend. When they finally arrived in the city, Mabel's heart was filled with both hope and trepidation. She found a public phone and dialed the number she had memorized so many years ago. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. She tried again and again, but still there was no response. Mabel's hope began to wane, but she refused to give up. They waited near the phone for hours, Mabel dialing repeatedly, but each time was met with silence. Finally, As night fell, Mabel realized the bitter truth. Her friend was not going to answer. She and Divine were stranded alone in a strange city with nowhere to go. Mabel stood by the public phone, the receiver still in. Her hand, as the reality of their situation, sank in. Her friend, the one person she had hoped would help them, was not going to pick up. She was left with no plan, no place to stay, and a deep sense of despair that she fought to keep hidden from Divine. The streets of the city were unfamiliar and intimidating, especially as night began to fall. Mabel and Divine walked aimlessly, hoping to find some place where they could rest. The city was bustling with activity, but it felt cold and unwelcoming to them. They passed by brightly lit shops and restaurants, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the air, but they were on the outside looking in, disconnected from the warmth and comfort that seemed so close yet so unreachable. As they wandered, Mabel's mind raced, trying to think of what to do next. She knew they couldn't spend the night on the streets. It was too dangerous. But every door they knocked on remained closed, and every plea for help was met with indifference. The people of the city were too busy with their own lives to care about the plight of a homeless woman and her mute daughter. Finally, after hours of searching, Mabel spotted another uncompleted building on the outskirts of the city. It was dark and empty, much like the one they had lived in before. It wasn't much, but it would at least provide some shelter for the night. Mabel led Divine inside, her heart heavy with worry. They found a corner that was somewhat shielded from the wind, and Mabel laid down the few blankets they had managed to bring with them. As they settled in, Divine looked at her mother with questioning eyes, sensing the worry etched across Mabel's face. Mabel forced a smile, reaching out to stroke Divine's cheek. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "We just need to rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." Divine, ever trusting, nodded and curled up beside her mother. Mabel watched as her daughter's eyes fluttered closed, her breathing slowing as she drifted into sleep. But Mabel couldn't rest. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of their future, or the lack thereof. The city was a harsh place, and without a home or money, survival seemed almost impossible. As the hours ticked by, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on Mabel's soul. She thought about Peter and the life they had once shared. The love that had once been so strong had turned into something unrecognizable, twisted by disappointment and blame. Mabel had accepted her fate long ago, but she had never stopped hoping for a better life for Divine. Now it seemed that hope was slipping away, replaced by the cold, hard truth that they were utterly alone. There was a man named Chief Bernard. He had no wife or children and had never been married. He always said that marriage was too stressful, preferring instead to live alone. However, Chief Bernard was very wealthy and popular in the city. He owned many properties and businesses, and his influence was well known. One day, as he was eating in a small local restaurant, something unusual happened. A young girl named Divine entered the restaurant quietly, going from table to table, gesturing for food. The customers ignored her, too busy with their meals to notice her silent pleas. Divine was about to leave, disappointed and hungry, when Chief Bernard called out to her. "Come here, little one," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Divine approached him cautiously. As she stood before him, Chief Bernard realized that she couldn't speak. Her eyes were full of unspoken words, and he could see the desperation in her expression. He felt a surge of pity for her and immediately ordered food for her. Divine sat down and ate gratefully. savoring each bite as if it were a treasure. Chief Bernard watched her closely, moved by her quiet dignity. When she finished eating, she looked up at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. Chief Bernard asked, "Where do you live? Who takes care of you?" But Divine could only gesture, unable to explain her situation with words. She pointed to the door, indicating that she wanted him to follow her. Intrigued and concerned, Chief Bernard decided to follow the girl. They walked together through the busy streets of the city until they reached a run-down, uncompleted building. It was clear that this was where Divine lived. Chief Bernard was shocked to see the poor condition of the place. It was cold, dark, and unsafe, a place no one should have to call home. Mabel, Divine's mother, was waiting nearby. She looked up in surprise as she saw her daughter return with a stranger. Divine quickly explained their situation through gestures, and Mabel's eyes filled with both gratitude and embarrassment. Chief Bernard, deeply moved by their plight, knew he couldn't leave them there. "You can't stay here," he said, softly but firmly. "This is no place for you and your daughter. Come with me." Without hesitation, Mabel and Divine followed him. Chief Bernard took them to one of his properties, a small, clean apartment that had been empty for some time. "You can live here as long as you want," he told them, handing Mabel the keys. "There's no rent to worry about. Just take care of yourselves." Mabel was overwhelmed with gratitude. She thanked Chief Bernard repeatedly, tears of relief and happiness filling her eyes. Divine, too, smiled brightly, her silent way of expressing the deep gratitude she felt. As days passed, Mabel and Divine settled into their new home. The apartment was comfortable, a safe haven after years of hardship. They could finally breathe easy, no longer worried about where they would sleep or find their next meal. One day, Chief Bernard called Mabel with a request. "Mabel," he began, "I've heard that Divine is a talented cook. My chef has just resigned because she's relocating abroad with her husband. I was wondering if Divine could help me with cooking." Mabel hesitated for a moment, thinking of her daughter's young age and the responsibilities it might bring. But she remembered how much Divine loved to cook and how good it would be for her to have something meaningful to do. She also couldn't ignore the kindness Chief Bernard had shown them. "Of course, Chief Bernard," Mabel replied. "Divine would be happy to help you, but please, you don't have to pay her. You've already done so much for us." Chief Bernard chuckled warmly. "Divine's work deserves fair payment. It's important for her to know the value of her skills. I insist on paying her a salary every month." Mabel, touched by his generosity, finally agreed. From that day on, Divine began helping Chief Bernard in the kitchen. Though she couldn't speak, her actions spoke volumes. She moved with confidence and skill, her love for cooking evident in every dish she prepared. Chief Bernard quickly grew fond of Divine. Her quiet determination and the joy she found in her work brought a new light into his life. He found himself looking forward to the time they spent together in the kitchen, where the aroma of freshly cooked meals filled the air, and the silent bond between them grew stronger. For Mabel and Divine, life had taken an unexpected turn. The hardships of the past were slowly fading away, replaced by a future filled with hope and security. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chief Bernard sat in his living room, enjoying the quiet contentment that had filled his life since Mabel and Divine had come into it. He appreciated the warmth and joy they brought into his home, a contrast to the loneliness that had once consumed his days. But this peace would soon be disrupted. His cousin Jude, whom Chief Bernard had supported many times in the past, arrived at his doorstep unannounced. Jude was a man who had wasted every chance given to him, squandering the money Chief Bernard had provided him with over the years. Each time he returned with a new excuse, asking for more. Now Jude had heard rumors that Chief Bernard was helping a woman and her daughter, and his heart burned with jealousy and rage. Jude stormed into the house, his face contorted with anger. He couldn't believe that Chief Bernard would offer assistance to strangers while refusing to support his own flesh and blood. Jude's frustration spilled out as he confronted his cousin, demanding to know why Chief Bernard had chosen to help others rather than him. Chief Bernard, who had been calm and composed, felt his anger rising. Years of disappointment with Jude's irresponsibility came rushing to the surface. He had spent countless sums of money trying to help Jude, only to see it wasted. Bernard was still paying for Jude's children's school fees, something Jude had never taken responsibility for. The accusation that he owed Jude anything struck a deep nerve. Chief Bernard's anger blazed as he confronted Jude, reminding him of all the support he had provided over the years. Despite his best efforts, Jude had thrown away every opportunity. Chief Bernard's voice was filled with frustration as he made it clear that Jude had no right to demand anything more from him. He had done more than enough. Jude, stunned by the force of Chief Bernard's words, stood in silence, the truth of his failures beginning to sink in. But pride wouldn't allow him to admit his mistakes, and instead, he stormed out of the house in a fit of anger, slamming the door behind him. As Chief Bernard stood alone in the quiet that followed, he knew he had done the right thing by confronting Jude, yet a sense of unease lingered. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also stirred something dark and unresolved between them. Little did Chief Bernard know, this encounter would set off a chain of tragic events. A week later, Divine visited the market to purchase the ingredients needed for the day's meals. Over time, she had become a familiar presence among the vendors, who greeted her warmly despite her inability to speak. Divine's kind demeanor and gentle nature made her well liked by those who crossed her path. After completing her shopping, Divine made her way back to Chief Bernard's house, her mind filled with thoughts of the dishes she would prepare. As she entered the house, something felt off. The usual warmth seemed to have been replaced by a strange, chilling silence. With her heart pounding, Divine moved through the house, searching for Chief Bernard. When she entered the living room, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. Chief Bernard lay motionless on the floor. Dropping her bags, Divine rushed to his side, her hands shaking as she tried to wake him. Panic gripped her as she realized something was terribly wrong. She desperately tried to rouse him, but Chief Bernard did not respond. The full weight of the moment hit her. Chief Bernard was gone. Grief and terror overwhelmed Divine. The man who had shown her and her mother so much kindness, who had become like a father to her, was no more. She felt paralyzed, unable to process the reality of his sudden death. The sound of sirens filled the air, and the front door burst open as police officers stormed into the house. Divine, still in shock, was quickly pulled away from Chief Bernard's body. Her mind couldn't grasp what was happening, but she soon found herself in handcuffs, labeled as the prime suspect in his death. As she was dragged out of the house, Divine's heart was heavy with dread. She hadn't done anything wrong, but now she was being blamed for the death of the one person who had ever truly cared for her. Mabel heard the terrible news of Chief Bernard's death and her daughter Divine's arrest. Her world fell apart. The man who had shown them so much kindness was gone, and now her daughter was being accused of his murder. Mabel felt a deep, crushing sorrow. She rushed to the police station, desperate to see Divine and find out what had happened. But when she arrived, the officers refused to let her see her daughter. Mabel pleaded with them, her voice breaking with despair, but it was no use. They turned her away, leaving her to walk home alone, her heart heavy with grief. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the full weight of their situation. She had no money to hire a good lawyer to defend Divine, no one to turn to for help. Mabel felt utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake. Meanwhile, at the police station, Divine was suffering. The officers, convinced of her guilt, treated her harshly. Unable to speak and defend herself, Divine could only cry as they questioned her. When they asked if she had killed Chief Bernard, she would shake her head frantically, trying to convey her innocence, but no one believed her. The more she tried to deny it, the harder they were on her. The situation grew even more hopeless when it was discovered that the CCTV cameras in Chief Bernard's house had been disconnected the day before his death. This meant there was no footage to prove what had really happened. Without evidence to support her innocence and with Jude fueling suspicion against her, Divine's situation seemed increasingly dire. Mabel, back at the empty apartment that Chief Bernard had given them, sat on the floor and cried until she had no tears left. She didn't know how to help her daughter, how to clear her name, or how to bring justice for the man who had saved them from a life of misery. Mabel was lost, drowning in sorrow and fear, with no idea of what to do next. Days passed in agony for both mother and daughter. Mabel kept trying to visit Divine, but each time she was turned away. She prayed for a miracle, for someone to step in and help them. But as the days dragged on, it felt like that miracle would never come. The weight of their misfortune pressed down on them, leaving them trapped in a world of darkness with no clear path to the light. Jude came to Mabel's house one evening, his face twisted in a mask of false concern. He knocked on the door, and when Mabel opened it, he stepped inside, pretending to care about what had happened. Mabel's eyes were red and swollen from days of crying, and she looked exhausted, her spirit broken by the weight of everything that had happened. Jude sat down and spoke to her softly, acting like he was on her side. He told Mabel that he wanted to help Divine. He said that if Divine agreed to confess to killing Chief Bernard, she might receive a lighter sentence. Jude explained that this was the only way to save her daughter from a long, harsh punishment. He told Mabel that this was her last hope, that there was no other way. Mabel, desperate and scared, clung to Jude's words, as if they were a lifeline. She was willing to believe anything that might save her daughter from more pain. Mabel had no one else to turn to, and Jude's offer seemed like a ray of hope in a world that had become dark and cruel. With tears in her eyes, she thanked Jude, her heart aching with gratitude, thinking that he was genuinely trying to help. When Mabel was finally allowed to see Divine, she hurried to the police station, her heart heavy with fear and hope. As she walked into the room where Divine was being held, her heart broke at the sight of her daughter. Divine looked so small, so fragile. Her eyes were red from crying, and her body trembled with exhaustion and fear. The sight was almost too much for Mabel to bear, but she forced herself to stay strong. She believed she had found a way to help Divine, and that gave her the strength to push aside her own pain. Mabel sat beside Divine and gently took her hands. She told her daughter about Jude's offer, explaining that if she confessed to the crime, she might get a lighter sentence. Mabel's voice was filled with desperate hope, clinging to the idea that this could be the way to save her daughter from more suffering. But Divine's reaction was not what Mabel expected. Divine shook her head fiercely, her eyes wide with disbelief and sorrow. She pulled her hands away from her mother's grasp, her heart pounding with anger and pain. Divine knew she was innocent. She had loved Chief Bernard like a father, and the thought of confessing to something she hadn't done felt like a betrayal to his memory. She couldn't understand how her own mother could ask her to lie about something so serious. Mabel couldn't understand Divine's refusal. In her mind, this was the only way to protect her daughter, to keep her safe. She grew frustrated, her voice rising as she tried to convince Divine to agree. But Divine remained firm, refusing to admit to something she hadn't done, even if it meant facing more pain. As Mabel's frustration turned into anger, she lashed out, saying things she would later regret. She called Divine a dumb child, accusing her of being senseless for not agreeing to the confession. The harsh words cut deep, stabbing at the core of Divine's being. Divine's heart shattered as she heard the cruel words from the one person she thought would always stand by her. She began to cry, her silent sobs filled with a sorrow that words could never express. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a world where no one could hear her. No one could understand her pain. The next day, Jude showed his true colors. He came to the apartment that Chief Bernard had given to Mabel and told her she had to leave. He claimed that without Chief Bernard around, the apartment was no longer hers to live in. Mabel was stunned, unable to believe what was happening. But with no choice, she gathered her few belongings and left the place that had become a small refuge for her and Divine. Mabel found herself once again homeless, wandering the streets until she found another uncompleted building to stay in. The weight of everything was too much for her to bear. She was tired of life, of the endless suffering and heartbreak. She cried constantly, feeling abandoned and hopeless. The dreams she had once held for a better life were now completely shattered. She had lost her home, her daughter was in jail, and the man who had been like a guardian to them was gone. The day of the court trial arrived, and the atmosphere was heavy with tension and uncertainty. Divine, who had been through so much already, stood before the judge and jury, unable to speak to defend herself. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't express. The silence that filled the courtroom felt like a prison in itself, suffocating and inescapable. The prosecution laid out their case against Divine with a ruthless efficiency that made Mabel's heart break even more. They emphasized that Chief Bernard had been poisoned and pointed out that Divine, as his cook, had been the last person to prepare his meals. With no voice to explain herself, and no strong lawyer to argue her case, Divine's fate seemed all but sealed. The court-appointed lawyer had tried his best, but he lacked the experience and determination needed to stand up to the prosecution. The lawyer could not make the judge and jury see Divine for who she truly was. A kind, innocent girl who had been caught in a web of lies and deceit. As the trial continued, it became clear that Divine's silence was being used against her. The jury saw it as an admission of guilt, not understanding the depth of her pain and frustration. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, the words struck like a hammer, shattering any last glimmer of hope. Divine was sentenced to life imprisonment. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and murmurs, but all Divine could hear was the sound of her own heartbreaking sobs. Mabel, who had been too overwhelmed to attend the trial, received the news later that day. When she heard the verdict, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. The one person she had left in the world, the child she had carried, nurtured, and loved with all her heart, was now gone. Mabel couldn't believe the cruelty of the justice system. Her mind filled with rage and despair. She cried out to God, begging for mercy, for a miracle that would save her daughter from this unjust fate. Mabel's anger at the world, at the system, at Jude, and even at herself, consumed her. She felt betrayed by everyone, even by God. "How could this be happening?" she cried. "How could my sweet, innocent daughter be sentenced to a life of misery for something she didn't do?" The pain was unbearable. Mabel's tears flowed endlessly as she prayed and pleaded for some kind of divine intervention that never seemed to come. Meanwhile, Jude, the man who had been the catalyst for this tragedy, was reveling in what he thought was his victory. When he heard that Divine had been sentenced to life imprisonment, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. To him, it meant that the path was now clear for him to claim Chief Bernard's wealth. Jude's greed had grown to monstrous proportions, and all he could think about was getting his hands on the riches that he believed should have been his. Eager to secure his place as the heir to Chief Bernard's fortune, Jude went straight to Chief Bernard's lawyer. He arrived at the lawyer's office with a smug smile, confident that he was about to inherit a vast fortune. However, the lawyer's expression was unreadable as he pulled out Chief Bernard's will. Jude's heart raced with anticipation as the lawyer began to read, but as the words filled the room, Jude's smile faded, replaced by shock and disbelief. Chief Bernard had willed the majority of his properties to an orphanage, a final act of generosity that left Jude's dreams of wealth in ruins. Only one of Bernard's mansions and a company had been left to Divine, a gift of love and care for the girl who had been like a daughter to him. However, with Divine in jail, the lawyer explained that he couldn't transfer the properties to her. Instead, he planned to donate them to the less privileged, in keeping with Chief Bernard's wishes. Jude's face turned bright red with anger, his mind spinning from the shock. Everything he had planned for, everything he wanted to gain, was slipping away. The lawyer noticed Jude's frustration and asked why he was so interested in his late cousin's property. Jude, too angry to think straight, muttered something unclear and stormed out of the office. Outside, Jude's mind was filled with rage and bitterness. All his hopes and dreams of wealth and power had been crushed in a single moment. The anger in his heart grew stronger as he realized that his own actions had led to this, but there was nothing he could do. Chief Bernard's will was final, and no amount of anger or plotting could change that. As Jude walked away from the lawyer's office, he felt a deep emptiness settle in his chest. He had sacrificed everything, his honor, his family, even his humanity, in his pursuit of wealth, and now he had nothing to show for it. One afternoon, Mabel sat in a small, quiet garden, lost in thought. Her life had been filled with pain and suffering since the day her husband had driven her out of their home. The past few months had been especially hard. Her daughter Divine was in prison, sentenced to death for a crime she didn't commit. Mabel had spent countless nights crying out to God, questioning why such cruel things had happened to them. Now, as she sat alone in the garden, she felt like there was nothing left for her in this world. Suddenly, her phone rang, breaking the silence. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and answered. To her surprise, it was Jude's ex-wife on the other end of the line. This was unexpected. Jude's ex-wife had left him soon after Chief Bernard's death and moved to the United Kingdom with her children. Mabel's heart began to race as she wondered why this woman was calling her now. After all this time, Jude's ex-wife spoke quickly, her voice filled with urgency. She told Mabel that she had overheard a disturbing conversation between Jude and someone else on the phone just before she had left Nigeria. Jude had been bragging about how he had disconnected the CCTV cameras at Chief Bernard's house the day before he died. Then he admitted that he had poisoned Chief Bernard, driven by jealousy and greed. The weight of his confession had been too much for her to bear, and it was the reason she had left him. Mabel was stunned. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Jude had been the one responsible for Chief Bernard's death all along. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Jude's sudden interest in Chief Bernard's property, his insistence that Divine confessed to the crime, and the way he had forced them out of the house Bernard had given them. It was all a part of his twisted plan. Jude's ex-wife continued, explaining that she hadn't come forward sooner because she had been terrified for her life and the lives of her children while they were still in Nigeria. Now that they were safe in the UK, she felt she could speak out without fear. Mabel's hands trembled as she listened, realizing that this could be the key to saving her daughter. Without wasting another second, Mabel thanked Jude's ex-wife and hung up. She immediately rushed to the police station, her heart pounding with hope and fear. She played the recording of the phone conversation for the officers, who listened intently. The evidence was clear. Jude was the real culprit, and Divine had been wrongly accused. The police wasted no time in arresting Jude. During the interrogation, faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Jude finally broke down and confessed to everything. He admitted that he had killed Chief Bernard out of jealousy and resentment. He couldn't stand the thought of his cousin's success while he himself had failed in life. His confession was bitter and filled with regret, but it couldn't undo the damage he had caused. News of Jude's arrest and confession spread quickly. The court overturned Divine's conviction, and she was released from prison just days before her scheduled execution. When she walked out of the prison gates, Mabel was waiting for her, tears streaming down her face. They embraced tightly, both crying, unable to believe that this nightmare was finally over. Chief Bernard's lawyer met with Divine a few days later. He handed Divine the documents for the mansion and the company that Chief Bernard had left to her in his will. As Divine took the papers, something miraculous happened. She whispered, "Thank you, Lord." The lawyer stared at her in shock. This was the girl who had been mute her entire life. How could she suddenly speak? Divine herself was stunned. The words had come out of her mouth without her even realizing it. She rushed home to share the incredible news with her mother. When she reached the house, she called out to Mabel. Hearing her daughter's voice, Mabel froze in disbelief. She turned to see Divine standing there, speaking words she had never thought she would hear. They both cried and laughed, overcome with joy and gratitude. They danced around the room, praising God for the miracle that had transformed their lives. In the years that followed, Divine's life blossomed. She went on to complete her education, graduating with top honors. She took over the management of the company that Chief Bernard had left her, and quickly proved herself to be a talented and compassionate leader. The company flourished under her guidance, and she made sure to give back to the community, just as Chief Bernard had taught her. Divine and Mabel moved into the grand mansion that Chief Bernard had willed to her. It was a far cry from the uncompleted buildings where they had once struggled to survive. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had been replaced by a new sense of purpose and hope. Mabel often reflected on the journey they had taken, from being abandoned and living in poverty to finding kindness in the most unexpected places and finally receiving the justice they deserved. Divine never forgot the lessons she had learned through their hardships. She continued to speak, both literally and figuratively, using her voice to advocate for others who had been silenced. She and her mother lived peacefully, their lives now filled with joy, gratitude, and the memory of the man who had once saved them from despair. Chief Bernard's legacy lived on through Divine, and the love and kindness he had shown her and her mother remained in their hearts forever.